Hey, this is Brad Stulberg, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Brad, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I am holding on to right now. Let me just get this up here. The Way of Excellence. Now I've got the uncorrected galley proof here, but that's what you get when you do conversations like this. A guide to true greatness and deep satisfaction in a chaotic world. Brad, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me.
So last time you were on, we talked about the practice of groundedness. And I mean, the natural progression for me the natural first question for me to ask is the progression from that book to this book. Like what led you down the path to pursue something that, frankly, the only other person I've heard like kind of lean into this as heavily as you that I've come across in my life is Jim Sinegal from Costco, because he would say that the pursuit of perfection is a problem. What we want excellence. And he pushed that while I was with that company for, 10 years. He's no longer the CEO, but that was woven throughout Costco's kind of ecosystem. And to see it presented here, I mean, just the depth and levels that you went to kind of go into it here. What was that progression like? Was it natural, or what did it seem like this is in terms of the work, or was it just a natural place for you to go?
I think the answer is yes to all of that. It felt
Okay.
very natural. It also felt like a natural place for me to go. Um, I feel like in this moment in particular, there's so much confusion about what greatness is, about what excellence is, that I really, first and foremost, wanted to clear up that confusion, to reclaim excellence as a genuine, heartfelt aspiration that is uniquely human and full of creativity from hustle culture greatness and pseudo excellence and all the optimizers and bros that just get this so backwards. Then the more that I got into the topic in the research and reporting for the topic, I realized that there hadn't really been a book written about this kind of heartfelt, genuine excellence, about what it means and about the habits, mindsets, and practices that folks use to attain it and sustain it. In that turned this into more of an article, which is how this started. I wanted to write an article called "Reclaiming Excellence in a Chaotic World," and very quickly I realized that I had more than an article. I think I had a book.
One of the things that right out of the gate you kind of leaned into, and I loved, it's actually in the first, I think it's first paragraph here, second paragraph, I guess technically. Uh, you know, when we are working with distraction on something that matters to us, one of the things you put in here, you had like a list of sentences, and one of the ones that really landed with me, especially considering the work I'm doing now, is you're in a state of relaxed productivity, which I immediately wrote down productiveness next to it, because that's an area that I've been pursuing. Is the distinction between productivity and productiveness is it seems subtle, like the wording is different, but there's such a vast difference between the activity of producing versus the state of being productive. And when when you talk about like what excellence does, why are we so why do we pursue things like, say, efficiency first, right? Like, why are we looking at those metrics? And you bring up Persig in the book as well, Robert Persig, who wrote Zen: The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Quality, and we'll get into some of that as well. But why do you think the pursuit of, say, something like efficiency seems to be more of the way things are going in this world as opposed to excellence?
For two reasons. I think the first is that it's a lot easier to measure. And we're pretty obsessed with measuring everything.
Yeah.
We measure the steps that we take. We measure our heart rate variability. There's a longevity influencer named Brian Johnson who measures his erections. I'm not kidding. Like, we're just obsessed with measuring everything. It's absurd. The second reason is that I think that people have a short-term horizon. In the short term, being as efficient as possible feels really good. And there's a big difference, though, between getting the most done that you can in a day, a week, or even a month, maybe even a year, and having a super productive career or a
Right.
super productive life. And often short term rote efficiency is at odds with long term excellence.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it, and I mean, I don't get political on my work very often, but when you see a department being created around efficiency, and it turns out to maybe not be living up to its namesake, you kind of figure, did they get it wrong, right? And I think a lot of that happens. Same thing with you talk about pseudo excellence, which I mean, pseudo productivity comes into the performative productivity comes into play here. We see that a lot. We're seeing part of my thoughts around the let's get everybody back in front of the office isn't just so much around, hey, we want everyone to be around as a team, et cetera, et cetera. There are benefits to that for sure. But there are there are other things that aren't being talked about, perhaps, real estate, perhaps, hey, if I see you here, that I'm making the assumption that you're being productive, that you're working. You can kind of throw those things out there to make sure that you're following the fold, so to speak. Excellence seems to be the same. You talk about excellence versus pseudo excellence. Can we share the distinction between the two? Because I think that that's where people can get caught up as well.
That's right. So let's start with what excellence is not. Excellence is not perfectionism. Excellence is not optimization. Excellence is not waking up at 4 in the morning to cold plunge and posting a video about it on the internet. Excellence is not taking 48 different supplements and counting every single one of your calories. None of those things are excellence. Those things are pseudo excellence. They are the performance of being great versus the concern with actual greatness itself. So, what is true excellence? True excellence is simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. It is involved engagement in something worthwhile that aligns with your values and goals. And both parts of that definition are really important. So, involved engagement means a level of caring, of focus, and of attention. There is not a distraction. There is as little space as possible between you and your craft. That's involved engagement. Something worthwhile that aligns with your values and goals, it has to be directed towards an activity that you are doing for its own sake and that you are also doing for the impact that it's going to have on you.
Mm.
So with excellence, we think that we are training to run the marathon or trying to build the perfect table if we're a woodworker or write the perfect song if we're a musician. But the act of training or building the table or composing the song is also shaping us as a person. So it has to be in alignment with our values. We think that we're only working on the thing, but the thing is also working on us.
Yeah, you bring that up. Like we get out of our head and into our being. Like, I mean, this lines up with the doing productive, being productive kind of stuff that I talk about, which is why it resonated so much. And you talked earlier about the level of measurement. It is so interesting and fascinating to me that in a culture that can, frankly, ignore data that may not necessarily agree with what someone, with what's actually going on, they can be selectively decisive around data, right? So quantitative metrics over qualitative ones, let's say. Which is why, when you read stuff like Robert Pirsig's kind of body of work, which, by the way, if anyone, those are tough reads. At least the two big ones, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which came out in 74, and Lila, which I think came out in 86, if I remember correctly, or the early 90s, something like that.
I think it was 92. Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere in there. But those are, you can see the kind of obsession, for lack of a better term, of Pirsig towards quality. Why? You talk about in the book, like, the things that you can do, right? Like, hey, you talk about the foundational stuff. I go back to the kind of the beginning of it. You've divided the book into parts where it's like, hey, these are the foundations, and then these are the mindsets and the habits and the practices that you need. Practice is really important. Um, none of How many of these? How do you get people to shift that quantitative with some of these mindsets, habits, and practices to make that shift so that they can see, number one, oh, well, I selectively ignore metrics when it suits me. So how do
Mhm.
I select, like, in a way that supports my kind of the way I'm operating? How do I do this in a way that actually supports excellence rather than just going through the motions?
I think that you have to ask yourself a question, and that question is, am I working for the metrics or are the metrics working for me?
Right.
And what I mean by that is if you're working for the metrics, then you're just measuring something for the sake of measuring it, and you can become a slave to that metric, and you can lose sight of what it's actually doing for you. If the metric is working for you, if it's holding you accountable, if it's helping you make progress, if it's motivating you, then that is a metric worth tracking. I think what often happens is we don't ask ourselves that question. and we track things just for the sake of tracking them. And then we begin to stress out about hitting some arbitrary number that doesn't actually align with our values or goals or what we're trying to accomplish. Or what also often happens is that we start tracking something for all the right reasons, but then it loses its utility because we outgrow that metric or we outgrow the need to track it. And then it actually holds us back. So, a very concrete example of this is you think of a distance runner. And
Right.
perhaps when you're first starting and you're running a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon or even a marathon, you might want to wear a watch that gives you your pace. You might want to wear a heart rate monitor if it tells you what zone you're running in. And all of that is so beneficial for a beginner because you don't really know what you're doing. And without it, you fly blind and you don't pace well and you probably blow up in the race. However, at a certain point, you get good enough where seeing your pace or your heart rate can actually get in the way of your best performance. Because instead of listening to your body and feeling your way toward a peak performance, you're now a slave to this thing on your wrist that's telling you how fast you should or shouldn't be going.
Right.
So what happens is you might be having your best day, but you look at your watch and it says, oh, I'm running too fast. So then you slow down instead of trusting yourself that, hey, this is a time to peak. I can have my best day. Or the flip side is true. Your heart rate might be low and you might think, I got to run faster to get it up. But that might be your body telling you that actually, no, you're tired and you need an easier run. So there's this nuance around measures and metrics, which is we should use them insofar that they're helpful. But the things that once helped us eventually are the things that get in the way. And I think excellence encompasses all this. There's a framework in the book that I really like, the 4 levels of competence or the 4 levels of mastery.
Yeah.
And the first level is unconscious incompetence. So you don't know that you don't know what you're doing. And in this phase, no measure is going to help you. What you need is a coach. You need a coach or a book. You need to learn. Then the second phase is conscious incompetence. So this is when you're aware that you don't know what you're doing. In here, again, you need coaching, you need mentorship, you need education, and maybe you start tracking things because the things you're tracking are showing you that you're missing. Then the third phase is conscious competence. So this is when you're aware that you're doing it right. And this is where you look at that watch and you say, I'm running at the right pace. Or you look at your word tracker and you say, I'm writing 300 words a day. Or you look at your time block planning and you say, I've nailed all these different time blocks. And that's really good. You're making progress. The measures are helping you. But the final stage of competence, where real peak performance occurs, is what researchers call unconscious competence. And that's when you go from doing productivity to being productive. When you are just in the zone, you are flowing, you're not nearly as reliant on external metrics because you can feel your way to the place that you need to be. And there are traps at every single one of these junctures. And there's a trap when you don't use metrics because you think you're already a pro and you're not. You actually need the metrics. But then there's a trap where you're scared to release from the metrics and to become a pro.
You know, one of the other examples, people talk about flow all the time, and you bring up
Yeah.
shitty flow.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the book.
Well, it's so funny because it is this, you can take anything and flip it to make it work for you, right? Like you can, so example, like, again, and I love the book, The Score Takes Care of Itself. As much as I'm a Bengals fan and the 49ers, killed us every single time, especially since Bill Walsh was a coach for the Bengals and it could have been the other way in a different timeline. But the idea of like Montana saying that Walsh wanted perfection. And it's interesting because you hear a lot of this around perfection, but it's more about perfecting than being perfect. But
Yeah, it's
we,
a process.
right, but we understand perfection, right? Like, because it's so, for us, it's absolute, right? Like, so the nuance part is so interesting because you hear about things like flow and friction, and they're like, oh, friction's bad. Constraints can be good. Friction can show flow. Flow's great. When you're in flow, depends on what you're, can you talk
Right.
a
There's
bit?
2 ways
Yeah,
to get into flow. You can get
right.
into flow dominating a basketball game or writing a manuscript or leading a company or presenting to a board or doing science or developing a life-saving technology or medication. But you can also get into flow while using heroin while playing slot machines, while doom scrolling on TikTok. Um, that's the difference between positive flow and shitty flow. And what is a defining feature of excellence that separates it from flow is that it is not values neutral. Flow doesn't care about your values. Flow is just a state of being in the zone. Excellence says it's not enough to be in the zone. You have to be in the zone on something that aligns with your values. And you're not always going to be in the zone. There are these flow junkies that chase flow and they think that they have to be in a flow state to perform well. But 99% of the time, you're not in flow. And to be excellent, you have to be able to show up on the days when you're not in flow and to raise the floor and to have your average days be a little bit better. And the other thing about flow that everyone overlooks is those transcendent moments, they only happen if you've done the tedious, mundane work of the fundamentals prior to that.
Yeah.
And I think that we're in a culture that is very short-termist, quick fix, instant gratification. So of course people focus on flow. But flow is just like one little component of what it means to truly aspire towards excellence. It's an important one, but it's not the whole ballgame.
Well, and one of the things you brought up early on was that you talk about the bear story, right? Where you were so into
I love
something,
that story.
right?
Yeah.
But what it caught me, when you say had I experienced excellence, the first thought that came to mind, and I actually wrote this down in my notes, was what did I say here? Oh, come on. I think I said so. Oh, here it is. So in theory, you could excel at mediocrity, which by definition means that you're not entirely mediocre. Like if you were excelling at like it's again, there's nuance there, right? Like you hear like, well, there's movies, Slacker, right? Like Richard Linklater stuff, like the slacker excels at slacking, therefore that. So it's interesting that I guess what when we talk about this kind of stuff, it always seems to be that we're shooting for the end game, the final boss, the end, the win, right? Which when you associate it with competition in sports and so on and so forth, like when I was running, the one thing that I eventually decided, and I think wisdom, experience, age, that all plays a role. And we get into that a little bit. I know you touch on levels and you can't really get mastery. Time has a role to play in that, obviously, as does experience. But I realized that the only person I was competing with was the ability to get to show that I could do it. That was my form of excellence in that pursuit. But again, I use the word pursuit. We're always chasing, like you pointed out, or how do you get someone from recognizing that excellence isn't so much a destination but a journey?
I think there's a couple of important ways to do this. The first is to realize it's not process over outcomes, it's process and outcomes.
Right.
So outcomes matter. And if you are starting a company, you want the company to be profitable. You want to be able to grow and get investors. That matters. If you are an athlete, you want to win. There's a reason that there's a score on the scoreboard because winning matters. So anyone that says that the result doesn't matter, I'm very skeptical of, because unless you're a Nepo baby and you've got gazillions of dollars and you don't have to do anything, then results actually, they are important. They matter. Just because results matter doesn't mean that we should obsessively focus on results. The best way to get good results is this paradox of performance, which is to stop stressing about the results and to forget about the results and just to focus on the process, to dig where your feet are. And this is the essence of a process mindset, which says, yes, set big goals. Absolutely. But then break the big goal down to its smaller component parts. Largely forget about the big goal and just focus on nailing the parts. A memorable moment of reporting for the book was in speaking with Kelly Humphreys, who's one of the winningest winter athletes of all time. She's got 3 gold medals, 1 bronze medal, and 5 world championships at the bobsled. So you can do the math. That's about 20 years of dominance on a world level. And I asked her about how she prepares for the Olympics and how she goes about Olympic cycles, which happen every 4 years. And she says, well, I want to win gold medals. I want to be the best in the world. That's very important to me. So there's the outcome. She didn't say it doesn't matter. She says it matters a lot. Then she said, in order to win those gold medals, I've got to take a 4-year Olympic cycle and break it down into 2 by 2 years. And each of those 2 years has a purpose. And then I break those 2 years down into year 1 and year 2. And each of those years has a purpose. And then each year is broken down to quarters. And in the first quarter of the year, I'm doing base building. And in the second quarter, threshold work. And in the third quarter, tempo work. And in the fourth quarter, sprint work. And then each of those quarters, each month has an emphasis. And then in each of those months, each week has an emphasis. And then in each week, I've got to execute 6 days of workout. And I wake up every morning and I'm not thinking about winning a gold medal. I'm thinking about what I need to do today. That is the essence of a process mindset. It keeps you focused, keeps you present, and it keeps you patient on where you are. That is so contrary to what we think, because we think in order to be motivated, you just have to post on your mirror, win a gold medal and obsess about the destination. But thinking about the destination is not the same thing as working towards it. And you don't get to the destination by thinking about it or by dreaming about it or by talking about it. You get to the destination by working on it. And in order to work on the destination, you kind of have to forget about the peak and really focus on climbing exactly where you are.
Yeah, it's not like we have teleportation devices where I'm like, I want to go to this destination, and then you can
I
just
wish
go.
it worked like that. Be easier.
It would be, but
But
we pretend.
it wouldn't be satisfying,
No, it wouldn't be as it's like the distinction. And you bring up, you don't expressly talk about AI in the book, but there's definite hints towards, especially when
Oh
we
yeah.
talk. Yeah, there's definite hints towards when I'm looking at where is it? It's
I think I know what you're going to say. There's a hypothetical where I lay out and I ask this question all the
yeah,
time to people that I work with. If there was a machine,
yep,
and I know that you're into music, you're a music guy, so you probably found this really resonant. If there was a machine and you could press a button, and that button would write you an incredible original Grammy caliber song,
which it can
and
right
then
now, which you could
and then
right
you
now.
and then you win a Grammy for that. So you, Mike Vardy, are a Grammy award-winning artist, but all you had to do is press a button. Would that be satisfying or fulfilling? Of course not.
No.
It'd be cheap because you didn't do anything. So the actual satisfaction and fulfillment, it doesn't come on the podium or the award stage. It comes in the process of doing the work to get there. There is so much fascinating research that shows that what leads to happiness and contentment isn't results. It is exerting effort on things that we find worthwhile.
Well, yeah,
That's what
because
excellence is all about.
Well, because at the end, and this is what drives, I think, a lot of people crazy is you can get a hit of dopamine by getting your inbox to zero, and then you get a hit of dopamine by typing in the last words of a first draft of a book. And the distinction between the two, depending on where you're at, like there's so much there, it could feel similar. I got my inbox to zero. I got my book done. It may feel you higher, like there may be a higher level of euphoria because the book took longer. But it doesn't last very long.
No, it's the same. It's the same little double click.
Yeah.
And it fades really fast. And there's a big difference. I've been thinking about this a ton, and it's a recurrent theme in the book. There's a big difference between happiness in meaning or satisfaction.
Yes.
And I think too often we chase happiness, which is great, but it is ephemeral. It's kind of like a butterfly. The more you try to squeeze it, the more it flies away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what we really want is satisfaction. I mean, most people that I talk to that are interested in productivity and productiveness and excellence and these sorts of things, what we want to feel is we want to feel like at the end of the day, when our head hits the pillow, we can rest easy because we put in a good day's work. And I don't say work in the, people are going to say, you're such a capitalist, where there's more to life than working. No, I don't mean work like that. I mean work like effort on something that you care about. Good work. Making art, training for sport, running a business. And you know what? Maybe it is being the best accountant you can be. That's fine. But we feel good when we're using our skills and we're working towards something that's hard, not when we're happy.
No.
I mean,
well,
again, I'm going to use like a very extreme example because I think this is such a good point. You know what can make you really, really happy, or so I'm told? Heroin.
Yeah.
No one would say that a good life is the life of a junkie that's just high on heroin all the time. But that person's happy when they're high. But there's no meaning. There's no satisfaction. So why on earth do we trick ourselves and tell ourselves that we've just got to get to the top of all these mountains to get the high and not realize that it's actually the effort along the way that fulfills us? And by putting in the effort along the way, we enjoy the top of the mountain so much more. It's the difference between the button that writes the Grammy song or you writing the song.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that you do more either. I think that's the other issue too, is that this idea of the more I do, the more fulfilled I'll be, or the more satisfied I'll be, or the happier I'll be. That's a fallacy too, because I mean, look, again, I'll go back to the Costco example, right? Like Costco is an example of, hey, we're going to be excellent. We have less stuff here that we sell. We have less things that we are doing. So we can focus our attention, effort, energy on these things at a greater degree. So therefore, it's going to better the experience for the customers walking through the building. We can focus on things like lower prices, lower margins. Like we don't need to worry about these high margins because this membership experience, if we treat it differently, and that's kind of the way that, but if you, there's so much confusion and even, there's almost like this, you mentioned capitalism. There may be this idea of the more I do, the more I feed out there and put out there, the more fulfilled I'll be. But that's not necessarily the case either. In fact, I would argue that it could be. I mean, you can't matter. You talk about mastery and mattering. You can't matter. Everything can't matter, and you can't master everything. So you've got to be selective.
Yeah, trade-offs are, got a whole chapter in the book, is a crucial factor of excellence is, um, the illusion of balance, or at least how balance is popularly conceived, which is I need to be the perfect husband or wife or employee and parent and friend and athlete. And I need to stay up to date on all the sitcoms and drama shows and politics and on and on and on. And I need to cook and I need to keep the house clean and on and on and on. And by trying to be balanced, which the self-help industrial complex says is the goal, you end up making yourself stressed and miserable. So rather than try to be balanced, I would argue, no, pick a couple things that really matter to you. Give those things your full effort, energy, and attention, and then be comfortable saying no to things that don't matter to you. Another difference between pseudo-excellence and the real thing is pseudo-excellence looks at the word optimization and they equate it with doing everything possible, more, more, more.
Right.
The actual definition of the word optimization has nothing to do with quantity. It's all about quality.
Yeah.
Optimization means to do something the best. Well, guess what? In order to do something the best, often you can't do more, more, more. You have to do less so that you can focus fully.
I want to talk about gumption. It never comes up. That word is I love it because you hear words like grit, resilience. I mean, resilience kind of leans into that a bit. Can we talk a bit about what gumption, the role of gumption in excellence? Because first off, not a lot of people hear that word at all anymore, and I can't imagine the last time I heard it or saw it mentioned, let alone a whole chapter. It's right smack in the middle of two of them that I also would love to touch on if we have time, which is routine and curiosity. But let's dive into gumption a little bit and what role it plays in excellence.
I love gumption. Gumption is a sense of enthusiasm, in energy, in forward inertia that you are not born with, but that you build.
Right.
So somebody that doesn't have gumption is going to face obstacles and they might succumb to those obstacles. Somebody that does have gumption, they're going to face obstacles, but they're going to figure out a way around those obstacles. Robert Pirsig, one of my intellectual mentors, you mentioned Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He talks about gumption is the psychic gasoline that fuels the trains of progress. And that's how I think of it. It's not motivation. It's not a hype speech that you get on the internet. It's this deep inside you reservoir of energy that says, I'm doing something that I care about. I'm paying really close attention to it. I'm focusing on it. And I feel like I'm setting myself in motion towards progress. And I don't even know the exact route I'll take where I'm going to go, but I'm confident that I can figure it out. And there are all of these things that drain gumption. So mistakes, setbacks, acute failures, missteps. And then there are all of these things that help us gain gumption, such as seeing the ball go through the net. I love this metaphor. In basketball, if you're a shooter and you're struggling to shoot, what do? You get to the free throw line. Why? Because a free throw is a high percentage shot. So you get a little victory. Little victories build on themselves. Those add to gumption. Exploring outside of your domain. I'm a writer. I'm a terrible musician. Guess what I do whenever I get stuck writing? I step away from reading books and I step away from writing and I listen to my favorite musicians and suddenly I can write again.
Yeah.
So finding things that inspire you that are a little bit different than what you're used to, that adds to gumption. It's going to look different for the individual, but there are all of these things that we can do to gain gumption, to gain and to build that reservoir of inertia and momentum that then help push us forward on our path.
Routines. They are. It's so funny because you alluded to it earlier when we were talking about Callie Humphreys and the bobsledding and breaking things down and all of those things that are very much a routinization of how you get to where you want to, how to achieve that level of excellence that you're searching for. Um, the term routine to me has almost become more. It to me it seems like it's the meshing of quantitative leaning that way more than qualitative, whereas I like rituals better. That's just, again, words.
Yeah.
I'm a writer too, right? So like those kind of things matter. What are the role of routines and or rituals in terms of excellence that you think that somebody who is really trying to get into that mastery and mattering combination, like where they could start with something like that? Like, because I think the other propensity is people will over routinize, like they
Yeah,
will,
yeah, yeah,
again, they'll go beyond, right?
100%. Yeah, you turn yourself into a robot, and that's not excellence. So, similar to measurements, like, your routine should work for you, you shouldn't work for your routine. And this is what the internet bros mess up. Unless you're trying to be world class at having a 47-step routine, there is no point of having a 47-step routine. It's just gonna drain energy.
Yeah.
The sole purpose of a routine is to help you build some forward momentum, to automate decisions, and to get started. For some people, that is as simple as making a cup of coffee. For other people, it's making a cup of coffee and doing 10 push-ups. For other people, it's making a cup of coffee and reading a book. For some people, it has nothing to do with coffee. It's getting out of bed and lighting a candle. And that signifies to their brain that, hey, the next day has come. I've got this quiet space and time, and now I'm going to get to work.
Or it
There
could be
is
about,
no
or it could be all about coffee, like mine. My morning
right.
ritual of making coffee is like, it's the thing.
I mean, I got a not index on coffee because I'm like you. Like, my only routine in the morning is to make coffee.
Yeah.
And that just, hey, the day is here. I'm ready to go. And caffeine does have an ergogenic aid, which is just a fancy way of saying for most people, it does enhance performance. It's one of the few legal performance enhancing drugs that actually works and is very safe. But we're not here to promote coffee and caffeine. That's been, I think caffeine doesn't need us to promote it. People get it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that the point is there's no single best routine. You have to figure out what works for you. And you just need to ask yourself, what are some small behaviors or small things that I can do to signify to myself that, hey, it's time to get going. And this is why athletes have all kinds of different pre-performance routines. There's fascinating research that shows that some athletes, what they need to do is a lot of short, high-intensity bouts of movement. So big, broad jumps, or even hit the weight room before a game to like really get their body all springy and coily. Other athletes, they need to do a 45-minute slow jog. Now, this gets to the individualization of routines, and it's not just true in sport, it's true for all of us. But I think the main misnomer is, again, you got to ask yourself, are you trying to be great at doing a routine? Are you trying to be great at writing or running a business or being a coach or being a leader? And for most people, it's the latter. And if it's the latter, then I would aim to shorten that routine, to simplify it, get down to the essence of what actually really helps you get ready to perform. And then that's what you ought to do. There's a framework in the book. I won't go into too much detail because it takes a lot of time, that I love. And it's really simple. It's 3 daily practices, 3 weekly practices, and 3 monthly practices. And most people can get their routine down to 3 things they do about every day, 3 things they do about every week, and 3 things they do once a month. And if you pick the right things and experiment, that's generally all you need.
One of the things that I want to drive home as I was going through the book, which, by the way, I think that this is a book that requires thought as you go through it. Like, I know you recommend at the beginning, here's how I would go through the book. You could go right to the second part, or you could start. I wholeheartedly that you have to go through the foundations element first, as far as I'm concerned, because it helps you understand it. Especially like, and remember, you're preaching to the choir here when I'm reading this thing, as opposed to a lot of people who are, not necessarily in the same choir, let alone like listening to the same music, let alone whatever, right? But one of the things that I think is really integral to not just reading the book, but just understanding, where you're coming from, is time plays a role in excellence, but you don't like so many people are like, I don't have time. How much time is this going to take? You're really focused on the task at hand, not the time on hand. And when I'm going through the book, and I think that, how do you get someone to break because that's part of it too, right? The idea of, I don't have time. How can I fit this in? Like we hear this a lot around meditation. I don't have time. I'll occasionally go, oh man, I know it's 5 minutes, but that 5 minutes could go somewhere else. When you focus on the task at hand versus the time on hand, I think that's where some of this can flip for you. How do you get someone to kind of start to think in that regard?
There's two different paths, and I think you have to take them both at the same time. No pun intended, using the word time. Um, the first path is block out periods for deep focus concentration and protect those like they're the most important thing on your calendar because they are. That is the hour and a half every Monday at 1 p.m., Tuesday at 4, and Thursday at, I don't know, 12:30. I'm making this up.
Sure.
But every elite performer, especially in knowledge work that I know, has periods of deep work, as Cal Newport would call it, or deep focus blocked out on their calendar where they know what they're going to do ahead of time. They eliminate distractions. They overcome the resistance and the friction that deep focus takes. And then they settle in and they make progress on big projects. You have to have those on your calendar, full stop. There's no way around it. However, a couple blocks of deep focus often isn't enough. And this is the other path that we're going to take at the same time, which is don't underestimate the impact of little gains and how those little gains compound over time to create something big. So you can chip away at something by just putting in 10, 15 minutes a day, if that 10 to 15 minutes is intentional and deliberate. Now, you're not going to be excellent, and you're not going to get on this path of excellence if all you do is these little 10 to 15 minute chunks. But if you've got the blocks of deep focus carved out, and you're also doing this bottom up, little by little approach, that's where the magic happens. So I think it's twofold. I think it's block those times off for deep focus work, protect them like they're holy because they are, and don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Realize that you can knock out a whole lot of progress in these little chunks. I write my book using this exact strategy. All my books. I wrote this book using this strategy. I do it two ways. I've got my deep focus blocks where I'm reading, researching, and writing. And then I've got these walks that I do even on non-writing days, 10 to 15 minute walks.
Yeah.
And on a 10 to 15 minute walk, I can write an entire paragraph in my head. And I carry a little notebook and I jot down the notes. Now, if I didn't take those walks, the books wouldn't be as good. But they would never get written if I didn't have the deep focus. It requires both.
Yeah.
So set aside those big blocks, but don't think that that's all you need, or don't think that you need to have tons of big blocks. Don't, what's the word I'm looking for? Don't minimize. I'm trying to think of a pithy way to say this. Like, don't minimize the minimal effort, because the minimal effort compounds to something big.
It's funny. I mean, I'm listening to Murakami's What I Talk About When I Talk About Running
Oh, such
right
a
now.
great book.
Oh, so good. And I mean, it's so funny when you listen to or read or, find or whatever, somebody who's doing something that you actually do or are thinking about doing. And because you're right, there are some people who conflate, like, if you go for a run, you're not working. No, that walk, I do the same thing as you. Like, I'll go for a walk. In fact, as a night owl, I need to go for those walks early in the day because my brain is just a fog, right? Like, but it's that motion and the fact that my brain is like basically trying to untangle itself, for lack of a better term, that I can go, oh, right. Like a good example would be I'll listen to a podcast, let's say. One of the ones I listen to right now is What Went Wrong, which is a podcast about movies where things went wrong on set and they talk about it. And they talked about It's a Wonderful Life. We're recording this around the holiday season, and they talk about where it came from and how, what short story it came from and all that. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like Capra-esque stuff. This is perfect for like a blog post for this time of year. And my brain is doing that automatically. Like, it's wired towards those things that frankly, like you pointed out, leave me fulfilled. Right. And I think that people often think that sitting down and doing the thing is doing the thing. But as you pointed out, and you point out throughout this book, it's not always just the act of sitting there and doing the thing. It's the alignment that you're kind of getting into. Brad, I've read, The Practice of Groundedness. We've had conversations before. I'm really glad that you put this book out into the world, because it's something that we need. We need more of this, The Way of Excellence, a guide to true greatness and deep satisfaction in a chaotic world. Let's not forget that part, because I think that's a massive, massive qualifier. Brad, where can people pick up the book, and where can people keep up with the work that you're doing?
Thanks so much, Mike, for the kind words. You can get the book from wherever you get books. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, your independent bookstore. And you can follow my work on my Substack, which is just my name, Brad Stulberg. And if you are on social media, the platform that I am on is Instagram, where I'm at Brad Stulberg, and Twitter, where I am at B Stulberg. Although I guess now it's called X, but I still call it Twitter.
Same. Brad, thanks
We're
so much.
old.
Yeah, we are. Thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you.